The call that changed everything. The rain hammered against the windows of Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital's intensive care unit, nature's own percussion accompanying the mechanical symphony of ventilators and heart monitors. Elena Mercer had been on shift for 19 hours straight, her third double this week. Coffee no longer helped. The fluorescent lights gave everything an unreal quality, like she was moving through someone else's dream. Her pager buzzed. Room 412. Elena hurried down the corridor, passing the night nurse who gave her that look. The one that said this was bad. Room 412 held Warren Keller, 78, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, admitted after collapsing at home. His chart read like a medical textbook of suffering: metastasis to the liver and lungs, renal failure beginning, DNR order in place. The monitors were screaming when she entered. Warren's wife Margaret clutched his hand, her face a landscape of desperation. Their daughter Bethany stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching the rain. They both looked up when Elena entered. "He's in so much pain," Margaret whispered. "The medication isn't working anymore." Elena checked his vitals. The morphine drip was at maximum allowable dose. Warren's face contorted, his breathing labored despite the oxygen. His eyes found hers, conscious despite everything, pleading in a way that transcended words. "Please," he mouthed. Just that, one silent word. What would you do if a dying man begged you to end his suffering? But doing so could send you to prison for the rest of your life. Elena increased the dosage, not by a little, enough to guarantee relief, permanent relief. 20 minutes later, Warren Keller was gone. 3 days later, the police were at her door. What nobody realized was that a new nurse had been on duty that night. One who didn't understand the unspoken protocols of end-of-life care. One who documented everything precisely, including the unusual medication increase. One who mentioned it to her supervisor, who mentioned it to the hospital administrator, who called the district attorney. Elena's fingerprints were all over the morphine drip controls, her signature on the chart. Her decision, made in the deepest part of night, when ethics and mercy blurred into something the law never anticipated. Did Dr. Elena Mercer commit murder, or was this the final act of compassion for a man beyond medical help? The question would soon rock the foundations of Westbrook County Courthouse, forcing everyone involved to confront what justice really means when suffering and mercy collide. The arraignment, courtroom 3B, of the Westbrook County Courthouse, had the smell of old wood and fading ambition. The benches, worn smooth by decades of anxious defendants and their families, creaked with every shift of weight. Light filtered through tall windows, casting long rectangles across the scuffed floor. District Attorney Maxwell Pierce adjusted his crimson tie as he waited for Judge Harriet Winters to enter. At 45, Pierce had prosecuted everything from shoplifters to serial killers. But this case was different. The defendant wasn't some career criminal or heat-of-passion murderer. She was a respected physician with an impeccable record. All the better for his political aspirations. The upcoming election for state attorney general would require name recognition. A high-profile case against a doctor accused of playing God. Perfect timing. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Harriet Winters presiding. Judge Winters entered, her robes flowing behind her like dark wings. At 63, she'd seen everything the justice system had to offer and maintained a reputation for fairness that bordered on legendary. Her gaze swept the courtroom, settling momentarily on Elena, seated beside her attorney. "Be seated," Judge Winters said, her voice carrying without effort. Case number 2024 CR 7847, Westbrook County versus Dr. Elena Mercer. Arraignment, hearing. Elena stood beside her attorney, Gabriel Torres. Unlike Pierce with his power suit and perfect hair, Torres wore a slightly rumpled gray suit that had seen better days, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing as the clerk read the charges. "Dr. Elena Mercer, you are charged with murder in the second degree in the death of Warren Keller on April 17. How do you plead?" The room held its breath. In the gallery, Margaret Keller watched with red-rimmed eyes, her daughter's arm around her shoulders. They'd been shocked when the police came asking questions, more shocked when they learned the district attorney was pursuing charges. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Elena said, her voice smaller than she intended. Judge Winters nodded. "Let's discuss bail." Pierce rose, buttoning his jacket with practiced precision. "Your Honor, the state requests remand. Dr. Mercer is charged with a serious violent felony. The evidence will show she deliberately administered a lethal dose of morphine to Mr. Keller, ending his life. This wasn't a medical error, it was an intentional act." Torres scoffed. "Your Honor, this is absurd. Dr. Mercer has no criminal history." She's a respected physician who has dedicated her life to saving others. She has deep ties to the community and is not a flight risk. She took a life, Your Honor, Pierce countered. A sacred trust was violated. When does medicine cross the line into murder? When a doctor makes the hardest choice imaginable. Can 12 strangers truly understand? Judge Winters removed her glasses, polishing them slowly as she considered. Dr. Mercer has no prior record and significant community ties. Bail is set at $500,000. The gavel fell. Elena felt the room spin slightly. $500,000. She'd have to mortgage her house, empty her savings, borrow from her parents, but at least she wouldn't be in jail while they prepared for trial. As the bailiff led her toward processing, Elena caught Margaret Keller's. The widow gave an almost imperceptible nod. In that moment, something passed between them. An understanding no law could codify, no courtroom could contain. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Pierce, always camera ready, stopped to make a statement. Today we begin the process of seeking justice for Warren Keller, and for every patient who puts their trust in medical professionals. No one, not even a doctor, has the right to decide when another person's life should end. The cameras flashed, capturing his perfect profile against the courthouse columns. What they didn't capture was the subtle smile that played at the corners of his mouth. This case would make headlines for months. Back inside, Torres led Elena through a side exit to avoid the media circuit. "We need to talk strategy," he said. "Pierce is using you as a stepping stone for his political ambitions. He'll come at us hard." "I did what any doctor would do," Elena whispered. "What I was trained to do." Torres stopped, turning to face her fully. "No, never say that again. Not to me, not to anyone. If you're admitting you intentionally ended his life, that's exactly what Pierce wants to hear. Then what am I supposed to say? That I made a mistake? I didn't. You say you administered appropriate pain management for a terminal patient. That's it. That's all. The rest is for Pierce to prove beyond a reasonable doubt." Elena nodded, but the weight of it all was crushing. She hadn't just lost a patient. She'd lost her freedom, her reputation, and possibly her career. And for what? For showing mercy to a man who was suffering beyond endurance. As they walked to the car, one question echoed in her mind. If she had to do it all over again, would she make the same choice? The answer terrified her because she knew she would. And what did that make her? The evidence battle, the pre-trial hearing for motion in limine, came 6 weeks later. Judge Winters' courtroom was empty, except for the key players. No jury yet, no reporters, no spectators, just attorneys, the judge and a court reporter whose fingers flew across the stenotype machine. Elena sat beside Torres, watching as Pierce arranged documents with military precision. Today would determine what evidence the jury would see. Both sides knew it could decide the case before it truly began. "The state calls Nathan Reed," Pierce announced. The hospital administrator entered, his thin face pinched with what appeared to be genuine discomfort. Reed had worked with Elena for years, had praised her dedication at staff meetings. Now he wouldn't meet her eyes. After swearing in, Pierce led Reed through his credentials before getting to the heart of the matter. "Miss Reed, please tell the court about the hospital's policy regarding pain management for terminal patients." Reed cleared his throat. "Oak Ridge Memorial has strict protocol. Physicians may administer pain medication up to the maximum approved dosage, as determined by patient weight, condition and tolerance. Any increase beyond that requires consultation with a second physician and detailed documentation." Mercer followed these protocols on the night of April 17th. "No. She increased Mr. Keller's morphine to approximately 3 times the maximum approved dosage." Pierce let that hang in the air. And what effect would such a dosage have? It would depress respiratory function to the point of failure. Torres rose for cross-examination, his approach less polished than Pierce's, but no less effective. "Mr. Reed, how many times have you personally treated a terminally ill patient?" Reed blinked. "I'm an administrator, not a physician. So 0. "How many times have you been in a room with a patient actively dying in pain?" "That's not my role. Yet you feel qualified to second-guess a physician with 7 years of clinical experience. Let me ask you this. Does the hospital policy address terminal agitation? The line between easing suffering and causing death is microscopically thin. When a doctor crosses it, is it compassion or crime?" Reed shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not familiar with that term. It's the restlessness, confusion and pain that many patients experience in their final hours. Does your policy provide guidance on treating a patient who is simultaneously dying, in excruciating pain, and when standard dosages have proven ineffective?" "Our policies cover standard of care." "Standard of care," Torres interrupted. Is it standard of care to allow a patient to suffer when medication could ease their transition? Objection. Pierce called. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. Judge Winters said. Ms. Torres, please limit yourself to questions. Torres nodded. Mr. Reed, has any physician at Oak Ridge Memorial ever been disciplined for increasing pain medication for a terminal patient before? Reed hesitated. Not to my knowledge. In fact, isn't it common practice to progressively increase medication when a patient develops tolerance, even beyond what might be considered standard dosage? In some cases, yes, but no further questions, Torres said, returning to his seat. Next came the battle over Warren Keller's medical records. Pierce wanted everything, every note, every vital sign, every medication administered during his entire stay. Torres argued for limiting the scope to the final 24 hours. Judge Winters considered, then made her ruling. The court will allow medical records from the final week of Mr. Keller's life, including the oncologist prognosis. Earlier records would be prejudicial without adding probative value. Pierce frowned, but recovered quickly. Your Honor, the state moves to admit the nursing notes from Sophia Jenkins, who documented the unusual increase in medication and Dr. Mercer's behavior that night. This was the moment Torres had been dreading. Nurse Jenkins was young, inexperienced, and had documented everything with the precision of someone who didn't yet understand the gray areas of medical practice. Your Honor, Torres countered, Miss Jenkins had been employed at the hospital for less than 3 months. Her interpretation of events is colored by inexperience. The defense moves to limit her testimony to factual observations only, not her conclusions about what was unusual or what Dr. Mercer's intentions might have been. Judge Winters nodded. The nursing notes will be admitted, but Jenkins' testimony will be limited to her direct observations, not her interpretations or conclusions. The morning continued with similar battles, Pierce fighting to include everything that painted Elena as calculating and deliberate, Torres working to contextualize her actions within appropriate medical practice. By noon, both attorneys looked exhausted. As they gathered their materials, Elena leaned toward Torres. How did we do? He gave a measured nod. Better than I expected. Judge Winters is giving us room to tell your story, but make no mistake, Pierce landed some blows. The nursing notes will hurt us. Elena watched Pierce conferring with his assistant, his confidence undiminished. He really thinks I'm a murderer, doesn't he? Torres followed her gaze. What Pierce thinks doesn't matter. He's a political animal who smells opportunity. What matters is what the jury will think. And what will they think? That depends, Torres said, closing his briefcase, on whether we can help them see the difference between the letter of the law and the reality of medicine, the human element that no statute can fully capture. As they left the courtroom, Elena felt the weight of what was coming. 12 strangers would soon sit in judgment, trying to understand a decision made in the darkest hour of night, in a moment no one could fully comprehend unless they'd been there. Would they see mercy or murder? The line between them had never seemed so thin. The trial begins. The morning of the trial, Elena stood before her bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Dark sickle underscored her eyes like bruises. She'd lost weight, clothes hanging loose where they once fit perfectly. 7 weeks since that night in room 412, and her life had become unrecognizable. She'd chosen a navy suit, conservative but not severe. Torres had advised against anything too formal or too casual. You're a doctor, not a defendant, he'd said. That's how the jury should see you. A doctor. Was she still? The hospital had placed her on administrative leave pending the outcome of the trial. Her medical license was under review. Even if she was acquitted, the stain would follow her. The potential jurors filed in. 80 citizens summoned for selection. They represented the full spectrum of Westbrook County teachers, office workers, retirees, tradespeople. Some appeared interested, others resigned to their civic duty. All would be asked to judge a situation most had never experienced. 12 strangers will decide if mercy is murder. Can they understand a decision made at 3 a.m. in a hospital room where suffering met compassion? The voir dire process began, with Pierce and Torres taking turns questioning potential jurors. Pierce focused on finding those who would strictly apply the law. Do you believe that laws should be applied equally to everyone regardless of their profession or intentions? He asked a middle-aged woman in the front row. I do, she replied firmly. Even if you sympathize with someone's motives, could you still find them guilty if the evidence proves they broke the law? Yes, that's what the law means. Pierce nodded approvingly. Torres took a different approach, searching for jurors who could see nuance. Have you ever been present when a loved one was suffering from a terminal illness? He asked a man in his 60s. The man's face tightened. My wife, cancer. 3 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss. During that time, did you ever wish you could do more to ease her suffering? The man's eyes glistened. Every day, by late afternoon, the jury was seated. 7 women and 5 men. A retired teacher. A construction foreman. A grocery store manager. A college student. A nurse. Pierce had tried to strike her but ran out of peremptory challenges. A postal worker, and 6 others whose ordinary lives would now involve deciding something extraordinary. Opening statements began the next morning. Pierce approached the jury box with measured steps, making eye contact with each juror before speaking. This case is about trust, he began. When we're at our most vulnerable, sick, afraid, in pain, we trust doctors to heal us, not harm us. We trust them to fight for our lives, not end them. He paced slowly, letting his words settle. The evidence will show that on April 17th, Dr. Elena Mercer broke that sacred trust. She administered a lethal dose of morphine to Warren Keller, not to ease his pain, but to end his life. She made a deliberate choice to play God, deciding Mr. Keller's time had come. When Torres rose for his opening, his approach differed dramatically. He moved closer to the jury, his voice conversational rather than performative. At 2:47 a.m. on April 17th, Dr. Elena Mercer stood at Warren Keller's bedside as he suffered through the final stages of pancreatic cancer. The maximum approved dose of morphine wasn't touching his pain. His wife of 52 years clutched his hand, watching him struggle for each breath. His daughter stood by, helpless. Torres paused, allowing the scene to form in their minds. Medicine isn't practiced in courtroom. It's practiced in hospital rooms at 3 a.m., when textbook protocols meet human suffering. It's practiced in moments when doctors must make impossible decisions with incomplete information. As Torres returned to his seat, Elena felt a momentary flicker of hope. He'd captured the essence of what happened that night, the reality that existed beyond documentation and dosage calculations. But when she looked at the jury, their expressions remained carefully neutral. Whatever they were thinking, they weren't revealing it yet. The prosecution's case. The courtroom fell silent as Pierce called his first witness. The state calls Sophia Jenkins. The young nurse entered, her uniform crisp, her steps hesitant. At 26, this was her first time testifying in court. Her eyes darted to Elena briefly before focusing straight ahead. After establishing Nurse Jenkins' credentials and role, Pierce guided her through the events of April 17th. Can you describe Mr. Keller's condition that night? He asked. He was in pain, Sophia replied. Restless. His vitals were unstable, blood pressure dropping, heart rate elevated. And what pain management was he receiving? IV morphine at 10 milligrams per hour, which is the maximum standard dose for someone of his weight and condition. Pierce nodded, approaching the evidence table. What happened when Dr. Mercer arrived? Sophia's hands twisted in her lap. She checked his vitals, reviewed his chart. She spoke with Mrs. Keller and their daughter. And then, she increased the morphine drip to 30 milligrams per hour. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Pierce let the number hang in the air before continuing. What happened next? Mr. Keller's breathing slowed immediately. Within 20 minutes, he was gone. What if the most compassionate act is also the most legally dangerous? Would you risk everything to ease another's suffering? When Torres cross-examined Sophia, he focused on her inexperience and the context she might have missed. Nurse Jenkins, how long had you been working with terminal cancer patients when this occurred? About 2 months. Had you ever been present for an end-of-life transition before Miss Keller? Twice before. And in your training, did you learn about terminal agitation and pain cascades that can occur in final stages? Sophia frowned slightly. We covered it briefly. Were you aware that tolerance to opioids builds rapidly in terminal patients, often requiring dosage adjustments? In general terms, yes. Torres handed her a medical journal. This peer-reviewed article indicates that end-of-life pain management often requires dosages that exceed standard protocols. Were you aware of that? Not specifically. The prosecution's case continued with the medical examiner confirming morphine overdose as the cause of death, the hospital pharmacist testifying about proper dosing protocols, and a pain management specialist stating that 30 milligrams was excessive by any standard. On the fourth day, Pierce called his final witness, Bethany Keller, Warren's daughter. Unlike the clinical witnesses before her, Bethany brought raw emotion to the stand. She described her father's illness, his courage, his decision to seek comfort care rather than additional treatment. He didn't want to suffer, she said, her voice breaking slightly. But he never asked to die. Pierce approached gently. To your knowledge, did your father ever request that his life be ended? Never. He wanted peace, but he believed every moment was precious. And what happened when Dr. Mercer increased his medication? Bethany's eyes filled with tears. He was gone so quickly. We barely had time to say goodbye. Pierce returned to his table. No further questions. Torres approached carefully, aware of the jury's sympathy for Bethany. Keller, first let me say how sorry I am for your loss. I know this must be difficult. She nodded slightly. You mentioned your father wanted peace. In those final hours, was he peaceful? No, she admitted. He was in terrible pain. Did the standard medication seem to be helping? Not really. He kept grimacing, moving restlessly. When Dr. Mercer came in, did she speak with you and your mother about his condition? Yes, she explained his body was shutting down and the pain would likely increase. Did she pressure you to agree to additional medication? No, she said she wanted to make him comfortable. And we agreed that's what Dad would want. Torres paused, considering his next question carefully. After she adjusted the medication, how did your father appear? Bethany took a deep breath. He relaxed. The pain seemed to leave his face. He looked peaceful. Thank you, Miss Keller. As Bethany stepped down, she passed Elena. Their eyes met briefly. No accusation, no forgiveness, just the shared understanding of an impossible moment. Pierce stood. The state rests. Your Honor. The defense fights back. Elena barely slept that night. Tomorrow she would take the stand. Her one chance to help the jury understand what happened in room 4. Torres had prepared her extensively, but no preparation could calm the storm of emotions. Fear, doubt, and underneath it all, a stubborn certainty that she'd done the right thing. Torres began the defense by calling Dr. Michael Chen, chief of oncology at Oak Ridge Memorial. Dr. Chen, a slim man with wire-rimmed glasses, described Warren Keller's cancer journey with clinical precision, but unmistakable compassion. Mr. Keller's prognosis was grim from diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer is often detected late, and his had already metastasized to his liver and lungs. Torres guided him through the medical details before asking, in your professional opinion, how much longer did Mr. Keller have to live when he was admitted to the hospital that final time? Hours to days, Dr. Chen said firmly. His organs were failing. The cancer had spread throughout his body. It wasn't a question of if, but when. And in those final hours or days, what could medicine offer him? Comfort. Nothing more. There was no recovery possible. No treatment that could extend his life in any meaningful way. Next, Torres called Margaret Keller, Warren's widow. Her testimony directly contradicted her daughter's on one crucial point. Mrs. Keller, did your husband ever express wishes about his final hours? Torres asked gently. Margaret nodded, her hands steady in her lap. Warren and I were married for 52 years. We discussed everything, including how we wanted to die. She paused, gathering herself. The night before he lost consciousness, he made me promise not to let him suffer at the end. He said, if it gets too bad, Maggie, don't let me linger like that. And did you share this conversation with Dr. Mercer? Yes. When Warren was in so much pain that night, I told her what he'd said. I told her he was suffering too much. Pierce's cross-examination was careful, respectful but probing. Mrs. Keller, did you specifically ask Dr. Mercer to end your husband's life? I asked her to help him, to keep her promise as a doctor not to let him suffer. But you didn't use the words please end his life. No, those words weren't necessary. Anyone in that room could see what Warren needed. On the final day of defense testimony, Torres called Elena to the stand. The room fell completely silent as she was sworn in. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The chance to hear from the doctor herself. Elena took her seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress, her dark hair pulled back, her expression solemn but composed. Torres began with her background: medical school at Johns Hopkins, residency at Mayo Clinic, 7 years of practice. With an unblemished record, he established her reputation for thoroughness, compassion, and professionalism. Then he turned to the night in question. Mercer, please walk us through what happened when you were called to Warren Keller's room. Elena took a deep breath. I'd been monitoring Mr. Keller throughout my shift. His pain had been escalating despite being on maximum standard dosage. When my pager went off, I knew immediately it was serious. She described entering the room, seeing Warren's contorted face, his labored breathing, the distress of his family. His vital signs were deteriorating. His pain was uncontrolled. He was experiencing what we call terminal agitation, a state of extreme distress that sometimes occurs in the final hours of life. In a world of rules and protocols, sometimes the most courageous act is knowing when to break them. Is that criminal or profoundly human? And what options did you consider? I considered maintaining the current dose, knowing it was ineffective. I considered calling another physician for consultation, which would have taken time Mr. Keller didn't have. Or I could increase his medication to provide relief. What was your intention when you increased the morphine? Elena met Torres's eyes directly. To relieve his suffering, to provide comfort in his final hours. Not to end his life, but to ensure those last moments weren't consumed by pain. Did you believe Miss Keller was actively dying regardless of any intervention? Yes, his body was shutting down. The cancer had won. Nothing I did or didn't do would change that outcome. Only the manner of his passing. Pierce approached for cross-examination, his expression neutral but his eyes intense. Dr. Mercer, you've testified that your intention was to relieve suffering, not to cause death. Yet you administered a dose 3 times the maximum recommended amount. Didn't you know this would likely be fatal? Elena didn't flinch. I knew it carried risks, including respiratory depression. But in end-of-life care, the calculation changes. The primary goal becomes comfort, not longevity. So you made a unilateral decision that Mr. Keller's comfort outweighed prolonging his life, even by hours or days. I made a medical judgment based on his condition, his expressed wishes through his wife, and my duty not to allow suffering when I could prevent it. Pierce pressed harder. Isn't it true that you knew this dose would end Mr. Keller's life, and that's why you administered it? Elena met his gaze steadily. No, I knew it would end his suffering. Death was already inevitable. But you knew this dose would hasten that death. I knew it might, but that wasn't my intention. As Elena stepped down, she felt drained but somehow lighter. She had told her truth. Whether the jury would accept it remained to be seen. Closing arguments and deliberation. The morning of closing arguments, Judge Winter's courtroom was filled beyond capacity. People stood along walls, crowded doorways, whispered in corners. This wasn't just another trial anymore. It had become a referendum on mercy, medicine, and the limits of the law. Pierce rose first, buttoning his jacket as he approached the jury. He'd discarded his usual power tie for a more subdued navy blue. Ladies and gentlemen, this case has taken us into difficult territory. We've heard about suffering, about compassion, about the challenges physicians face in caring for the dying. These are important conversations. He paced slowly before the jury box. But this trial isn't about whether we need better end-of-life care, or whether terminal patients deserve dignity. This trial is about one specific action taken by one specific doctor, on one specific night. Pierce held up the medication chart. The facts are undisputed. Dr. Mercer administered a dose of morphine, 3 times the maximum recommended amount. 20 minutes later, Warren Keller was dead. Pierce's voice softened. We entrust doctors with extraordinary power, the knowledge and means to heal, but also to harm. That's why boundaries exist. That's why protocols matter. Once we allow doctors to cross that line to decide when a life should end, we've fundamentally altered the doctor-patient relationship forever. Torres rose next. Unlike Pierce's measured approach, Torres moved closer to the jury, his energy more urgent, more personal. Throughout this trial, we've heard a clinical sanitized version of what happened in room 4. Charts, protocols, dosages. But medicine isn't practiced on paper. It's practiced in rooms where people are suffering, where families are watching loved ones slip away, where doctors must make impossible decisions with imperfect information. He gestured toward Elena. Dr. Mercer didn't walk into that room intending to end a life. She walked in to ease suffering that had become unbearable. She faced a situation where textbook protocols had failed, where a dying man and his family were desperate for relief. Torres's voice grew passionate. This case asks you to criminalize an act of mercy, to declare that compassion at the end of life is murder. The consequences of such a verdict would extend far beyond this courtroom. It would create a chilling effect on end-of-life care, forcing doctors to prioritize legal protection over patient comfort. Judge Winters then delivered her instructions to the jury, her voice clear and authoritative. The consent of a patient or their family is not a legal defense to homicide. However, you may consider the defendant's intent. If you find that Dr. Mercer's primary intent was to relieve suffering, not to cause death, this may affect how you apply the elements of second-degree murder. The jury deliberated through the afternoon and into the evening. At 7:30 p.m., Judge Winters sent them home, with instructions to return the following morning. The next morning, deliberations continued. Hours passed. The longer they took, the more Elena's anxiety grew. A quick verdict would have likely meant conviction. Extended deliberations suggested debate, disagreement, complexity, all of which might work in her favor. At 2:17 p.m., the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled quickly. Reporters jostled for position. Margaret and Bethany Keller sat in the front row, their expressions tense. Elena's parents, who had attended every day of the trial, clutched each other's hands. Judge Winters called the court to order. The jurors filed in, their faces unreadable. Elena searched for clues, a sympathetic glance, a hardened jaw, but found none. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Winters asked. The foreperson, a retired teacher in her 60s, stood. We have, Your Honor, in the case of Westbrook County versus Elena Mercer, on the charge of murder in the second degree. How do you find? The foreperson unfolded the paper, her hands steady. Time seemed to stop. Elena felt her heart pounding in her chest, blood rushing in her ears. 7 years of medical practice, one impossible night, 12 strangers deciding if mercy was murder. The foreperson looked up, her voice clear in the silent courtroom. We find the defendant. The verdict and aftermath. We find the defendant not guilty. The words hung in the air for a fraction of a second before the courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the rustle of movement, as spectators turned to one another. Elena felt Torres's hand on her shoulder, steadying her as relief washed over her in a dizzying wave. Judge Winters called for order, her gavel striking 3 times. The jury is thanked and discharged, she announced when quiet had been restored. Dr. Mercer, you are free to go. Court is adjourned. Outside the courtroom, reporters clamored for statements. Torres stepped forward, fielding questions while Elena embraced her parent. Today's verdict affirms that context matters in medicine, Torres told the cameras. Dr. Mercer acted with compassion in an impossible situation. This outcome protects the physician's ability to prioritize patient comfort in end-of-life care. Elena declined interviews, wanting only to process what had happened in private. As she navigated through the crowd, someone touched her arm gently. She turned to find Margaret Keller. Dr. Mercer, the older woman said, her voice steady. I want you to know that Warren would have been grateful for everything. Elena felt tears threatening again. I just wanted him to be at peace. He was, Margaret said simply. Thanks to you. When the system and compassion collide, it takes 12 ordinary citizens to remind us that humanity must sometimes supersede the rigid letter of the law. The days following the verdict brought a flurry of responses. Medical associations issued statements supporting the outcome, while calling for clearer guidelines on end-of-life care. Opinion pieces debated the implications for physician autonomy and patient rights. Legislators promised to review statutes governing medical practice in terminal situations. 6 months after the trial, Elena stood at the bedside of a terminal patient at Eastside University Hospital's palliative care unit. The elderly woman was in the final stages of COPD. Her breathing labored despite oxygen support. Is the pain manageable?